two. 1 2. 1 2 2. 1 1 1.
This is good. Look.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel and Tommy's wedding. 13th of the 6th.
1 2 2. 1 2.
So I was just
Yeah,
wondering.
9:15. So we'll bring them in from
From
now
breakfast.
soon.
Yeah.
Shall I just do a
You
really
start, right,
super
as the
fast
host.
welcome, fire escapes, toilets,
Great.
and now I'm going to hand over to. Do you prefer?
Just Alessandra. I don't need a title or anything like
I'm
that.
going to hand over to Alessandra to do a proper introduction.
What proper? I'm just basically thanking the sponsors. Thanking you, Dave and Jerome, for pulling this together. Thanking the volunteers. Say this and ask questions. Please don't turn it into monologues. Maybe too aggressive on the first one.
No, do it. Do it.
Okay.
Please ask a question if possible. Make it like that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think that's good because people do like.
Because we
Okay.
had incidents
Yeah,
last
of
year.
course. Everyone always does. And if you say it up front, then when we release it, we can say, no, come on. We
Yeah.
said at the start, make it questions. So it's cool. It's good.
And then, yeah, and then I just wanted to thank people for coming in.
Awesome.
You know, their commitment and engagement, and that's it, right?
Fab. Yeah, that's it. Let's go.
Okay.
Well, very excited. Did you come yesterday to
I arrived last night. Yeah, I always do this because I feel I have this weird like Catholic guilt about traveling on my, boss's expenses. So I take the
the
shittiest
cheapest?
flight
Yeah,
out,
me too.
which is at
Like
9.
4 a.m. Yeah.
God. So I wouldn't take a cab, which was fine, but it's
Same.
just.
I'm glad it's not just me. Like, well, someone has a nifty system.
Yeah, that's actually.
Try to get them in the UK. They won't ship them.
They won't ship them?
No, they won't ship them to the UK.
Oh, no. Because I was thinking of getting one as well.
Yeah, so I'm so excited and no.
Because our IT decided that we can't have admin rights anymore. And I'm like, no.
I bought a laptop on the BFI's money and bought it outside of the IT when they found out about it.
That's what we always did until a few months ago. Why me?
This is a BFI IT laptop, so to take revenge, I put a PC stick on it. How'd you like that, BFI IT? You'll never get that one. I super glued it. Are we happy to let everyone start coming in now? Yeah, let's do it. Okay, awesome.
In terms of when the show's running, these guys can get in touch with me via radio, but otherwise I'll just tune in.
Great, perfect. Thank you.
Hey,
Same.
this one.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Is it Edward?
It's just laptop sound. It doesn't matter. I was thinking how
Sure.
we're going to do it, but it's just what comes out of the laptop.
I see. Okay. Wait, hold on. So I think we're on the BFI Wi-Fi,
Yes.
but maybe we'd be better on the tech Wi-Fi because it might be stronger.
Oh, really?
So let me. Hey, Dave.
There you go. We're all set.
Okay, and you're not presenting slides, you're just talking?
No, no slides.
So,
Alessandra has natural charm, which we have to make up for. With
I'll take
slides.
it. I'll take
Ah.
it. Thanks.
yeah. Okay, I'll try to keep to time,
Yes, please.
but
I'll be sitting in front and I have flashy pages. If you see blue, you have 5 minutes. If you
Okay.
see orange, you have 3 minutes. If you
Okay,
see
okay.
yellow,
Super.
red warnings, that's your last minute.
Okay, you don't have a 10-minute flash.
I don't. But I can create that if you like that.
You just waved at me at 10 minutes.
Sure. 10 minutes. You got it.
And then blue is 5 and orange is 3. Yeah.
Sorry, I went and had a look again after not remembering it before.
I'll
break those
put
slides.
my stuff
Doing
down.
Just anywhere you like. I think the front row.
There.
Front
Cool.
Okay, okay.
Okay, we're on the good Wi-Fi now.
Hey. That should be a Netflix series.
The good Wi-Fi. That's good. That's brilliant.
Sorry, I zoned out.
You totally did.
That's okay. I'm going to steal it. So the fewer people that hear it, the better, because it's going to be a real thing.
You need an array of dad jokes.
I mean, I already had 5 people asking for the Wi-Fi
Yeah.
before 9 o'clock,
I'm
so
going to do it in my housekeeping import.
don't stream.
Yeah, don't please.
Don't update on your
There's
show
no,
right now.
no Facebook Live. We don't need Facebook Live at this point. Or ever. What even is Facebook Live? I should have brought water, you know. I know
They now do. I didn't even know they do time-based annotation. If you put in a comment under a video, it says like at this second.
at this second. Erwin said what rubbish is this?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's useful. So they can use it in the court case
Exactly.
for defamation.
Exactly. Well, it really is that because they first didn't have it and they were like, well, somebody's saying hateful things and we didn't know how to censor it.
Do people know that it starts at 9:15?
share posting folks in?
Yeah, Stephen is on it.
Stephen is okay. Oh yeah, sure. Are we good on the streaming? Everything's settled?
Seems like it's okay.
So I've been blue screen.
My girlfriend's ready.
I know. Cow cow.
Aren't any questions, then you'll be ahead of time, which is much better than being behind. So are you okay? Thinking of something? Off? When? Your life will never be the same again. So it's October now, so I don't need any time. Carry on. What we can do is you're part of the audience. Good to see you.
Testing 1 2 testing to the home audience. Hello, good morning from the BFI South Bank. Please speak into the mic. You're really not sick.
No. What should I say? The car, the blue Skoda parked outside.
Hello, hi, welcome everyone. I'm Stephen from the BFI. If I could just ask you to try and move in if possible, because we're expecting an almost full house. Thank you. I'm bad cop already.
Very good.
I love the back.
I'm always bad cop.
I love when Stephen's back.
I don't have a good cop. You know the Lego movie? They
Yeah.
rubbed out my good cop face.
Oh my god.
It's the secret to my success. Okay, let's do this. Hi everyone, welcome to the BFI. I'm Stephen McConaughey, I'm Head of Data and Digital Preservation at the BFI. We're going to have late arrivals and people turning up over the next few minutes, so to help it would be really useful if you could leave the end seats free. I think we might expect 10 or 15 more people. So, welcome to BFI South Bank. I'm going to do a bit of housekeeping very quickly, and then I'm going to hand over to Alessandra to do an introduction to No Time to Wait 3. First thing, can everyone hear me okay at the back, at the front? Good. Toilets. So the nearest toilets are straight outside the cinema auditorium there at the back. There's only 2 there. If there's queues, the closest are back into the main foyer where you came in. Go past the ticket area and the MediaTek on the left, and there's some stairs that will take you down to some more plentiful toilets. There's no fire alarm drills planned today, so if you hear a fire alarm, we have an usher at the back on the right there with a cap on. Thank you. If there is a fire alarm, please follow instructions from my colleague there, and if for some reason he's not around, follow instructions from me. You'll see fire exits. This one is probably easiest, and we assemble outside on the street. Hopefully that won't be necessary. So we're going to power through to the lunch break. There's a break in the afternoon, but in the morning we're going to go for it and get right into the detail and go. Lunch is about 12, so let's get on with it, I think. So I'm going to hand over to Wi-Fi. Sorry, Wi-Fi. You should find an access point called BFI_Wi-Fi. Everyone nod. The password is the same, and it might be in uppercase or lowercase. So try BFI_Wi-Fi as the password, and you should be good. It should be strong Wi-Fi, but I don't think it will support Facebook live streaming or such. So try and resist that. And if someone could nod and tell me that's working, yes. Excellent, thank you. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Alessandra to do a proper introduction, and welcome to the BFI and welcome to No Time to Wait.
Hi, hello. Thanks for coming to No Time to Wait 3. I would like to thank our hosts, the BFI and Stephen. I would especially like to thank Dave and Jerome for pulling this together as usual. It's fantastic. Thank you so much. I would also thank all the volunteers, because it wouldn't be possible without you guys. I also have to thank our sponsors, which are increasing every year, which is good. So Axial and Open Broadcast System for our lovely dinner tonight. My employer, CNA, thank you. The FIAF, AV Preservation by Reto, and Sound and Vision, of course. Thank you so much. Briefly, I would also like to remind all the speakers to be mindful of their time and of those coming after you. And if you have a question, possibly ask it as it's, like a question. Thank you. And of course, this wouldn't be possible because this is a community. This wouldn't be possible without your engagement and commitment and perseverance in this field. So thank you very much. I think it's going to be wonderful 2 days, and let's get started. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, my name is Erwin from the Netherlands Institute for Sound and Vision. I'm the stage coordinator for this morning. One addition to what Alessandra said about Q&As, we have a bunch of people tuning in from home. So the gentleman in the back and myself will be running around with mics so that the people at home can also hear you. Also a reminder for the speakers to please speak into the mic. And then without further ado, so we start this morning off with 2 blocks, and the first block is standards, and I think that's also why you and I are all here. And then the next block will be looking at the horizon and scanning that horizon. It's an enormous pleasure and honor to introduce you to our first speaker, who is Mr. Richard Wright, preservation consultant and former preservation specialist at the BBC Archives.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. We're ahead of time, and I'll try to keep us ahead of time. I never carry notes and speak off the cuff, but I really want to stick to time today, so that's why I have that here. It's not my computer.
And so I just need to get oriented a bit. This is the fancy things that show you things ahead of time on the screen in front of me. I'm talking about strategies more than standards. This is the summary. I have a brief aside at the very beginning. What is the problem? And then strategies. And then finally, at the very end of the talk, a little bit about prospects of what I think will happen to audiovisual content that's now sitting on shelves in particular. And one remark on storage. I'm retired, so I have time to make trouble. I was doing some volunteer work for a couple of oral history groups, so I got in touch with the British Oral History Society because they were having a conference. And I wasn't able to go to the conference, but I thought, wouldn't it be good if at that conference they could make a little bit of a plea? This is, I don't know if you can see the date, it's 2013. A little bit of a plea for what the difficulties were with audiovisual content. I had asked them if they knew how many oral history collections there were, and I was dismayed by their answer. Their answer was, well, we've been wanting to ask that question for 10 years, but we haven't been able to get funding to do a survey. I think people in this group are much more proactive than that. If you don't have money, you get on with it anyway. So I sent them this email, and as you can see, in it I said there is just no time to wait any longer, and that's 2013, so that's my marker down. And the only thing I would say in addition is that I'm very pleased that this group has taken the name No Time to Wait rather than This Is It Bird's Eye, which was my other phrase in that email. I think you probably have to be an old American for This Is It Bird's Eye to have much of an impact on you, but it was an advertising thing from a long time ago. What we were trying to do starting around about the year 2000, when we were trying to organize large-scale digitization projects within initially broadcasting, was first of all to see what was the size of the problem we were dealing with. And that's on the right, that's a slide from a paper of mine from 2002, finding 10 million hours of film. Well, what we found was 1 million hours of film, 1.6 million hours of video, and 2 million hours of audio in 10 broadcast archive collections. And then I, being a good engineer, I multiplied that by 10 to give you the 50 million hours that was my estimate for across Europe. UNESCO promptly doubled that, and Sue Malden, who some of you may know, who was working for BBC and UNESCO and Fiat and Focal at that time, convinced UNESCO to double it again. So if you look at the UNESCO website and it says 200 million hours of audiovisual content, it's because of my times 10 and a couple more times 2s. We did do some other survey work, and many other people have done survey work also. I wanted to mention the British University Film and Video Council Researcher's Guide. The 2006 edition of the Researcher's Guide lists 640 audiovisual collections in the UK. And the UK is a small country compared to the US, and the UK is a small country compared to the rest of Europe. I say the rest of Europe. For another 6 months, we'll be still able to talk about the rest of Europe, and who knows, and God help us after that. We did a, sorry. We did our first Presto survey, as I said, and found the 5 million hours. We also asked about its condition, 2/3 of it on obsolete formats, 1/3 of it damaged, and 1/4 of it fragile. So I started quoting the number, 70% of this stuff is at risk. That number is now 100%, really. If it's on a shelf, it's at risk, I think, full stop. We had a much bigger survey in 2004 and found twice as many hours. This is actual recordings of actual archives finding hours. 2007, the California Audiovisual Preservation Project. I don't know if anyone here was involved in that. They had a tool for assessment, and maybe this is a dead horse. I don't know if anybody has used Caliper. It involved random draws from the library and trying to do an assessment of need based on random draws. I thought that was the most singularly inept way to go about assessing an audiovisual collection that I could imagine, because what you really want to find out is how many U-Matics you've got and how many VHSs you've got and how many 1-inches you've got and how much equipment you've got. And then you can try subdividing them according to condition and value. But as I say, caliper may be a dead horse. Training for audiovisual preservation in Europe was a project run out of the Netherlands in 2000. They published their report in 2008. They had a lot of support from EASA for this survey, and they had a lot of audio collection, but they also had film and video collections. They found 25 million hours in their 374 collections. There was some overlap with Presto, so my conclusion was that we had documented about 30 million hours of audiovisual items, actually documented them in the UK. And then, and this was a real surprise to me, 2009, Indiana University. I keep thinking Indiana University is the new guy. This has been going on for a decade. And that's a sobering thought. Large projects take a decade, and then they're still not over. But anyway, the Indiana University, 560K items on one campus. That's a landmark survey. More recently, British Library Save Our Sounds, mainly audio collections, 3,000 of them in 488 institutions. As far as I can see from looking at the results, and there are people in this room who know the results better than I do, most of these collections are not digitizing, or at least at the time of the survey they were not digitizing. So that's a huge job of work sitting there. I want to, in closing, mention here the British Film Institute is right now doing a videotape collections audit. This is the first UK videotape survey that I know about. If you have UK videotape and you don't know about the BFI audit, then speak to somebody from the BFI because you need to be audited. My conclusion about surveys is that we don't need to do them anymore because we know that there's a lot of stuff out there. We don't need to do them for size. What we need to do them is what's the condition, what's the value, and in particular, coming back to the whole topic of strategies, is there a preservation strategy for this material? Because that's the starting point. If you have stuff on a shelf and you don't have a strategy, then how are you going to get funding? How are you going to get anybody interested? How are you going to take step 2 if you haven't taken step 1? All audiovisual content should be within a formal strategy, and I'll give you some formal strategies later on in the paper. It's an outline strategy. Doesn't take anything more than some thinking and some legwork. It doesn't take a whole lot of time, and it doesn't take a whole lot of money. You just have to focus on it and do it, and I'll give you some examples. When you want to take the next step and find out exactly who's going to do the work that needs doing and how much exactly it's going to cost and put a business case together, that takes more work. But a general strategy, this stuff is safe, this stuff is at risk, that can be done quite quickly, and it must be done. What are the ethics? You know, what do you do? How well do you need to do it? And I'm going to be going over some examples of which way you can go on this. I often hear that we have to be pragmatic, we have to live within our budget, we have to do what we can do. Doing something is better than doing nothing. Quoting Voltaire, the perfect is the enemy of the good. Some of you speak French, which I certainly don't. But he also said that that last one, the virtus avilit assez, but this is horrible when I try to speak French. What it means is that virtue is debased by trying to justify yourself. So, yes, Voltaire came down on both sides of that coin, so I wouldn't quote him at all. Ray Edmondson wrote the Audiovisual Archive Bible of audiovisual archiving philosophy and principles. If you don't know about this work, I recommend it. As far as possible, the new preservation copy should be an exact replica of the original. And that's an excellent precept. And then he goes in to talk about third world countries and hot temperature countries and high humidity countries and says, as you can see, if the best equipment isn't available, a lower grade digital copy from an endangered carrier is better than doing nothing. And that's where we are. You know, are we going to do the high end? Can we do the high end? Must we do the high end? Or are we going to come down, you know, go low? And how low can you go? What have we been doing in preservation and digitization? In 1970, the phrase was nitrate won't wait. This is before your time for most of you. I think it's largely seen, probably certainly by the British Film Institute, that what was done with nitrate in the 70s was wrong. It should not have been destroyed. It should have been kept, because the nitrate is now outlasting the acetate. In the I'll leave that there. You can discuss it with film experts. By the 1990s, it was what do you do with analog videotape? And what we did with analog videotape was we copied it to digital videotape and we put it back on a shelf. That's not a final solution. Anything on a shelf is a problem, as I've said, but that's what we could do. In the 1990s, to digitize to a file format was exotic. And it wasn't something that we could build a business case around. We did our first, in the BBC, we did our first file format from the U-Matics in the very late 1990s, and we were doing MPEG-2 at 20 megabits per second, which was seen as highly controversial because that's a compressed format. We didn't have very many lossless compressed formats to work with, and uncompressed was seen as irresponsible for U-Matic because U-Matic was a semi-professional format. Since then, we now have this digital stuff on shelves that we have to rip or transfer. There are questions there that are strategy and ethics questions about the originals and the artifact and the goal. I was named in an article in the IASA journal for not having committed what the Presto philosophy was on preservation of originals, and that's because I'm an engineer and that's not anything that I'm qualified to comment about. How much it costs to digitize a videotape is my business, and what you do with the original is not my business, so I kept my mouth shut about that, and I still will, but somebody in any project has to be thinking about that and making the right decisions the best they can. And then finally, of course, we're now faced with digital preservation, which doesn't take care of itself either. Since 2008, there have been economic problems. One result has been new offerings to try to digitize material cheaper. This is fast forward flatbed film digitization, costs £60 an hour instead of £500 an hour. But that's a Steenbeck. That's a Steenbeck with an HD video camera in it. It's digitization. It's production quality, according to the BBC. Then what? So there's an ethical issue here. There's not an ethical issue if you can keep the film and go back later to do better digitization. But there is an ethical issue if you say this is preservation quality digitization. I mean, where does it end? I wish I had a picture of David Walsh's film digitizer that he made out of his camera in a Matchbox. This is kind of like it. Or that you can digitize film with your smartphone. Where does it end? This is a Super 8 digitization piece of equipment at the bottom end. I don't know how low you can go, but there are definitely ethical questions about that. I want to talk about some lower cost approaches that are very interesting and of very high professional quality. These four that I know of all happen to have come from the US. RAD, Recover Analog and Digital Data, $15 per tape if you're a Wisconsin institution. That's a wonderful price. I don't know anything else about it. Anyone here who does, I think should try to spread information about this approach. It's not high end. They don't do time-based correction. They don't handle time code. But what they do handle, this is probably a very interesting solution for. They'll also send you a kit that you can do it yourself. At the higher end is Iowa State, and if you look up building a video preservation truly excellent professional information about how to do this if you're faced with doing it yourself. So I very much recommend that. The Transfer Collective do pop-up video transfers. And how charming. And I hope that, I wish every city had one. I think someone from this collective may be here. So please try to find out about this if you don't already. At the personal end, the DC Public Library says, bring us your VHS and your DVs and your VHSCs, and we'll be at your local library at these hours, and we'll help you transfer. The British Library is setting up audio transfer stations in 4 regional centers around the UK this year. So this is happening more than just in Washington, D.C., and again, very much to be recommended. There are issues about how far you get and what kind of material you put through this process, but we should certainly know and promote these processes. At the high end, obviously Indiana, and then the galleries, Tate and MoMA and people like that, are committed to the very highest levels of digital preservation because they're calling the stuff, unlike the BBC stuff, which was called, oh God, that's broadcasting, the stuff in the MoMA is art. So deserves what you can get. Doing something is better than doing nothing, but you won't get a second chance. I don't know which of these slogans really applies to your situation, but you better think hard about both of them. If there isn't going to be a second chance and you haven't done it right the first time, then that's wrong. And if that's all you could do, then that's very sad, but that is wrong. Here, strategy, very quickly on strategy. This is the BBC 16mm film collection. It's about 200,000 hours. It's of nationally importance. It's all the BBC news gathering material from the 1940s right up until about 1982 when it was replaced by Umatics. And you can stick it on a simple slide. The black and white negatives are in good condition. The Ektachrome has a bit of color fade, but it's got very, very high reuse value. The prints are fair, but they've been circulated. The soundtracks have vinegar, and why do I have that in there twice? Oh, the duplicates. We also had duplicate soundtracks, and they also had vinegar. So you can look at this map and say, okay, we've got to do something about the vinegar. The duplicates we're just going to throw away once we've transferred the originals, and the Ektachrome. The Ektachrome is going to be what we called access copies, namely digitized at standard definition. This is where Do It Right the First Time comes in, because the BBC never got a budget to redo that digitization of that film. And so that was wrong. Anyway, that's a preservation strategy, and here's a preservation plan. We're going to do something about that Ektachrome in-house, and we're going to take care of the magnetic soundtracks with service providers. So preservation map, preservation strategy, preservation plan, even for what is a large and to some extent complex collection. It had soundtracks, it had prints, it had Ektachrome, it had negatives. You can do these things, and if you haven't done a plan, and if you're an advisor to an institution that hasn't done a plan, well, there's no reason not to. I've got a couple minutes. In our survey, we found that people were digitizing at about 1.5% of their holdings per year. This is in the early 2000 to 2005. 67 years to digitize, that's not going to work. And that's really the problem. And then since 2010, things have gotten worse. I should have done this graphically. So I apologize for this. Year 2000, we have an archive. It's analog. It's a size of 2 units. By year 2020, if it's been digitized at 2% per year, they've done half of it in 20 years. So at that point, one of those A's has turned into a D for digitized. But these archives grow. physical material sitting on shelves, digital physical material sitting on shelves, has also been coming in, and born digital files have been coming in. This archive in 2020 has grown by 150%, but half of that analog is still sitting there undone. So my fearless prediction for that archive in the year 2040 is that half of the A and half of the P would be dealt with to form a new D, and there'd be a whole bunch more Bs, and that archive would have gone from unit size of 2 to a unit size of 8. So it's 4 times as big as it had been 40 years before, and people are going to say, what a wonderful archive, and it lost a quarter of its analog, and that's the lucky one. This is the unlucky one that hasn't been doing it quite so fast. I started it as a unit of 3 because it's only managed to do 1/3 in the first 20 years. By year 2020, okay, it's digitized 1/3. It's got some physical material. It's got the born digital stuff that floods in. In the year 2040, it's only going to have finished half of the analog because it had to spend time also ripping that physical stuff that was coming in, that wasn't in files, but was sitting on shelves. So I think this is typical. I think, and this is not an archive that's been sitting there doing nothing. This is an archive that's been doing something, but not enough. By the year 2040, half of the analog stuff is going to be dead. That's my fearless prediction for most collections. And there it is, and you can argue with the numbers as much as you like. Data tape, on the other hand, I have every confidence in. I started working in digital audio in 1967. There's a famous British, I'm tempted to say statesperson, Mandy Wright Davis, who says, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? I would say that I'm comfortable with digital because I've dealt with it all my life. I don't think people are even going to worry about migration starting in 10 years because the storage providers will just handle that. Equipment is lasting longer than I forecast. Obsolescence for film is probably not a problem, except maybe for telecine, and things go up and down on the telecine equipment side. There is no time to wait on videotape equipment. People like Memnon will buy it before you get there if you're unlucky. Prices have come down, so that's good news. But there's a lot more out there than I estimated 18 years ago. I mean, just the 540,000 items at Indiana. How many universities are as big as Indiana? Well, I'm an engineer. I can tell you there's 1,000 of them around the world. That's my best estimate, because 100 is too small and